There's
really.
a lot of that stuff that's really, really freaky. And then you get into old religious texts, and that's when things get really freaky. You get to things like the Book of Enoch that talk about the watchers who came down from the sky and created
clearly
humans.
a lot of unusual stuff happened a long time ago.
Yes.
A long time ago.
And we don't have a good record of it.
Yeah.
We just have what we know. And what we know, we get very arrogant about. We know what happened 300 years ago.
That's a really good
400
point. Of what we know, we get very arrogant about.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's
and
also
anything else we don't
these
accept.
academics and these people that are in charge of the narrative, like the people in Egypt, where they're very arrogant and they're gatekeepers because their whole identity is based on them being the ones that explain to the world how these incredible sites were produced. And if something comes along that is counter to that narrative, they fight it. They fight it because it is it's part of them. It's their identity.
When I spoke to Filippo Biondi, I talked to one of my cousins in Italy. I spent a lot of my time in Italy when I was younger. One of them, she was younger than I was when I was there, but she's now become a respected archaeologist in Rome, and she's an Egyptologist. Okay? And I went out to Italy to visit family, and I was sitting at the table. This is not even that long ago. And she's sitting next to me, and I mean, I remember her from being a kid. And she nudged me at the table. Her family's all academic. Everybody's a doctor or scientist or something like that. So there's always that pride of the science. And she nudges me, and in Italian she says, "I'm really interested in what you do, what you're looking into." And I knew what she meant. It was about UFOs. And I just responded, I'm even more interested in what you know about what's out there in Egypt. And she looked at me and she says, "We don't really know all of it. She said, a lot of it makes no sense." But she said it whispering because she knew that that's not well seen at the table, because now she's going to come across as this pseudoscience type of like, oh my God, she's going to come out of the mainstream, you know. So, and then she went to her place, and I was still there. We were there for a couple of days. She came and gave me a little book, and in Italian, I don't know how to say it. The missing. I don't know how to say it in English, but the missing Vangelo, like the missing scriptures, basically. It's a little book in Italian about the missing scriptures that are not in the Bible, that speak of things that are not convenient for what we are arrogant to think we understand.
And one of the fascinating things about these missing scriptures is they found them alongside existing scriptures. So when they found the Dead Sea Scrolls in Qumran, so they found these in a cave in Qumran. And it's kind of a crazy thing. Like someone threw a rock and hit a clay pot and heard the shattering of a clay pot. So they threw a rock into this high cave and realized there was something in there. And then they started looking. And then they found these scrolls that were in these clay pots. Inside the scrolls, they found the Book of Isaiah. It was 1,000 years older than the oldest version of the Book of Isaiah that we had ever found. And it's identical, verbatim, to the Book of Isaiah that is currently in the Bible. Along with it is the Book of Enoch. And the Book of Enoch is fucking squirrely.
The Book of Enoch is squirrely.
Yeah.
And that's a good way to describe it.
Just a few rabbis decided that the Book of Enoch was too weird because it didn't jive with the Torah, so they left it out of the biblical canon.
That's right.
That's why it's not taught. But the Book of Enoch is readily available. You could read it.
Absolutely.
And it's also in the Ethiopian Bible. The Ethiopian Bible includes the Book of Enoch.
Really?
Yes. And those are the people that supposedly are in possession of the Ark of the Covenant.
The Ark of the Covenant, yeah.
Which is like, Graham Hancock talks about it. There's like a person is set to, like, they have a job of watching the Ark of the Covenant, but it's known that it's going to kill them. So they all get cataracts and cancer and they all wind up dying.
Like bad things. Yeah, that's
well, it
right.
has some sort of radiation, apparently, and they exhibit signs of radiation poisoning when these people are designed to be the curators.
Where is the Ark of the Covenant
In
supposed
Ethiopia.
to be?
Supposedly in Ethiopia.
So you guys think that's...
I mean, I
think it's ancient technology. I think it's probably ancient technology. It's probably some completely not understood ancient technology.
No, I'm not discounting it. I'm just wondering.
Well, I like
Yeah.
the fact that you're skeptical, even though you have the craziest fucking story of
Yeah.
all time.
Yeah.
But it speaks to your integrity. It really does. Because you're not a guy who believes kooky shit. So for you, a guy who doesn't believe kooky shit is a hard, rational scientist who's an engineer who's done things like put a rocket engine in the back of a fucking Honda, and then, or a hydrogen-powered Corvette, and then you go and see these things. You're like, wait, what the fuck is this thing you have
Look,
in this
I
hangar?
worship technology.
Right.
Nothing else.
Right.
Yeah.
So, I mean, to hear something like that, do you think that actually exists?
I don't know. Graham
Do you
Hancock
think-
is convinced it exists. It's very
Yeah.
carefully guarded, and these people have been guarding it for centuries.
I mean,
there's
it's
just too many-
throughout history, right?
Yes, yes.
So,
I mean, there's too many missing pieces of the puzzle to really say one way or another. I don't think
whether or
there's-
not it was just
Yeah.
mythology or
Right.
an actual... Oh,
Right.
okay.
But it is weird that he's talked to these people that have these fucking cataracts, and these people all say the same thing. They die. The people that are designed or that are designated to be the curators of this particular religious
I
object.
relate this back to I think I told you the first time we met, if somebody found a nuclear reactor
Right.
Yeah.
back at that time,
Right.
and they took it apart, they just would drop dead.
Right.
From
Exactly.
the
Yeah.
magically
Right.
from that, and anybody that came in to check on them would also die, and they go, "This is evil, it's cursed or whatever,"
Or
and
something that you're not supposed to have access to because
right
it's divine.
or some other. Yeah,
Yes.
right. And could this be something at another level?
Yes.
That I have to say, and I'm no one to say it, but I struggle with divine stuff because I'm like, this craft or this technology. I mean, our phones to somebody 1,000 years ago
Yes.
would look like some divine object. I mean, it's technology
Clearly,
to us.
yeah.
So we have to be very cautious in, like, I'm not saying there is no divine something. Maybe there is. We don't know. But I think technology really could mask itself as divine power. if it's-
100%.
Yeah.
Or divine energy itself could be technology
True.
taken to its final form.
Wesley
the Book
Huff.
of Enoch is nuts.
That's
I talked
the
to Wes
Giants
Huff about
one.
it.
That's the Giants
It's
one,
not
right?
just the Giants, it's aliens. It's about the Watchers who came down and mated with human beings. Bro, I'm reading it right now.
I know you are. I
It's
already know.
bananas. She told me to read it. And she's like, you have to read this. It's nuts.
And what did Wes Huff say? Did he say there's a legitimacy?
It's 100% of a legitimate text. It's legitimate religious
Yeah.
text, but they decided not to include it because it's so nuts and because it goes against what the writings of the Torah.
Right, right.
So, but it was a few rabbis. Just a few rabbis decided.
That nixed
like
it.
if the Book of Enoch was
Yeah.
included in the Bible,
Yeah.
it changes the whole
Why would the
story of the
rabbis
human
decide
race.
what goes
'Cause back
into the
then
Christian?
they had that kind of power. They just decided that it doesn't get included in the canon. This is a long time ago.
But yeah, I mean, this is like around. Well, who decided the canonized Bible, right? This is like Constantine time, right?
Well, that's for the New Testament, right? And so with the Old Testament, you've got Wes Huff would be the guy to
Oh,
ask
wait a
all
minute.
these
Enoch
questions.
was included in the Old
Oh,
Testament.
it's old as fuck.
Oh, okay,
Not only is it old as fuck, when they found it, they also found a version of the Book of Isaiah. This is one of the things that Wes Huff told me that was really fascinating. They found a version of the Book of Isaiah that is verbatim the same as a version of the version of Isaiah that was 1,000 years later, which they
Unbelievable.
thought was the
Unbelievable.
original.
Unbelievable.
That's what's crazy.
Unbelievable.
For 1,000
maintain that.
years, they maintained the exact same story verbatim, writing it down and passing it on. And the Book of Enoch's in there with that. And the Book of Enoch is bananas.
Yeah, I think we might need to do a little deep dive on the Book of Enoch.
The Book of Enoch, it says that these Watchers came down and mated with human beings and created a race of giants called the Nephilim
Yeah.
who consumed and destroyed everything in front of them. Gee, that sounds like people.
yeah,
That sounds a lot like people.
Yeah.
If you got a bunch of little chimps and then you got these tall aliens
Yeah.
and they make a fucking 7-foot man,
Yeah.
a Viking, who's like chopping off heads and lighting villages on fire and
Yeah.
has this undesirable, unstoppable desire for conquest. That's humans. The Nephilim sounds like humans.
Like, yeah, exactly. So they're not giants. We are the giants. And then what
they
if the
might
other
be,
folks?
they might have been giants. Like it's hard to say.
But what if the other folks were the Neanderthals?
well,
Because there was a time where we're living together, right?
right. Well, they were here before us, allegedly. Well, the question is like, where did humans come from?
Yeah.
This is the real question. There's a really interesting show on PBS right now called Human, where this lady goes on this journey of, it's like, she's, what is her degree in? Is she an anthropologist? I believe she's an anthropologist. But or maybe some sort of biologist, but she goes over the history of the human species. It's very interesting. The migration from across the Bering Land Bridge into North America, when the oldest people started coming here, how they came here. Fascinating stuff. But that's one of those things, like if you think ancient history is filled with horseshit, like ancient human history, like of the humans. That's the woman's name. I don't want to fuck up her name. Ella al-Shamahi. And it's on BBC and PBS. Really good show. I just started watching it. She's a paleontologist, degree in genetics and taxonomy and biodiversity. But they just found recently a human skull that pushes the date of humans back another 500,000 years.
Yeah.
So it's like all they know is what they find in the fossil record, and there's so little fossil record.
Yeah.
And then they keep finding new things.
Yeah.
Like they just found Denisovans in like 2010. They're like, whoa,
What is that?
What's this? Total new branch of the human tree.
It's called
Denisovans.
Denisovans.
Yeah, they
Okay.
found like a bunch of teeth, I think, in Asia, and they're like, what the fuck is this? And then or maybe it was Russia. So there's that. There's the one that they found in China, the big head people.
That's the one that I saw
real
recently.
recent.
Yeah.
That's real recent. I forget what that one's called. We've done this a million times, but I always forget. But so they're always finding these new versions of humans. So how many of them really were there? But if there's a bunch of science experiments, if aliens are coming down and like, let's try them where they're short and really powerful and they only eat meat. And that's Neanderthals. Like, stop. This one's not
Too
a
much.
good design. This is not a good design. We need them a little more frail so they invent things.
Yeah.
Because the brutes don't invent anything.
Yeah, more frontal cortex.
Yeah, the Neanderthals had bigger brains than us. That's what's interesting.
So then what part of our brain was specifically different?
See, we have a very our idea of them is that they were dumb and they couldn't talk and that they were brutes. But it doesn't seem like that's true. In fact, it seems like they had art, they definitely had tools, and they had language. And they might have been as smart as us. They were just different. And maybe us being a little weaker is what made us smarter. You know,
Or made us work collectively.
maybe we're a little more alien, just a touch.
Right.
There's a little too much salt in that stew. Let's add a touch more of us. And, it seems like the hairy, 5'7", 200-pound fucking savages with big eyes that might be able to see at night because it looks like they might have had night vision. They have huge eyeballs, man.
Right.
The Neanderthal eye socket's way bigger than ours. Their skull's thicker. Their bones are more dense. They might have had night vision like a dog. You know how dogs, their eyes glow when the headlights hit them? They might have had that same ability.
I mean, I don't know why.
That design's too sketchy.
It's just not
They
working.
can see at night.
Yeah.
And then they go hunting other people. This is too much.
But then we hunted them.
Maybe. We might have just fucked them.
I also heard we fucked them.
Well, I
Yeah,
think
you
we
had that
hunted them and
joke,
we
right?
fucked
You're
them.
like, I got a little bit of... Yeah.
One more time with the monkey.
But in terms of like the stories, like, all right, you know when a comic gets off stage and like they think they killed but they bombed?
Right.
Like there could be people telling those stories in the books.
There could be.
Like meaning what their rendition of what happened is in the book, and that is what they truly believed happened. They might not even be delusional. They are delusional, but like that's what they saw, and that's what happened to them.
And history is always written by the winners.
Exactly.
Yeah. My version of the Bible story back in the day, I used to have this bit about Noah's Ark. I was like, the problem with the Bible is people are full of shit, and that story sucks.
Yeah.
Like, it's that simple. It's
Yeah.
like people lie all the time. I've never met any politician or any person who's in charge of anything that's like really important that I would say never lies. So if you're back then where there's zero accountability, zero video, zero anything, they can't even write.
Well, that's where the cross-referencing makes sense, right? It's like that's when you got a bunch of different people saying the same thing or similar things. You start to go, okay, maybe this did happen.
I'm sure you're aware of like the Book of Enoch. the Book of Enoch, which was one of the original biblical texts that wasn't included in the canon, but just because of a few rabbis decided it didn't jive with the Torah. And they found the Book of Enoch along with the Book of Isaiah as a part of the Dead Sea Scrolls. And when you find out that there was a biblical text that was contemporary to books that did make it into the Old Testament, and that they talk about the Watchers who come from above and mate with humans and create this race of giants called the Nephilim who destroy everything and consume everything. And you're like, what the fuck is this? Like, what is this? And just stop and imagine if those rabbis hadn't if that hadn't been excluded. Like Wesley Huff is great talking about this stuff. He's a real historian when it comes to, really understanding the history of these biblical texts, and he's absolutely fascinated by it. And he's like, yeah, it's kind of crazy that they just decided to not put that in the Bible. Imagine if they did. And part of when you're going to church and they're going over the Old Testament, like, okay, this week we're going to go over the Book of Enoch, and we're going to figure out who the Watchers are. Like, what is that? Like, what is that story? The crazy thing that Wes Huff told me was that the Book of Isaiah that they found in the Dead Sea Scroll predates the oldest version of the Book of Isaiah by more than 1,000 years.
Whoa.
When they found it, they found out that there was a Book of Isaiah that is 1,000 years older than the one they thought was the oldest one, and it is verbatim. It's verbatim from the one that's 1,000 years later.
Wow.
Which is kind of crazy.
Wow.
But then it's also in the same fucking caves as the Book of Enoch. It's all together there in the Dead Sea Scrolls.
Amazing. I mean, we've been fed this story that sort of all of these religions and myths from the past are all just false.
Right.
They're all just hallucinations.
Right.
They're all just lies.
I don't believe that.
It's just really, it's really arrogant, actually. Like, it's like, well, no, now, like, we've been around for, humans have been around for like millions of years, but the last 150 years is like we really figured it all out, and we figured out that all human knowledge before, whatever, some recent time period is nonsense. Yeah, I think that's quite arrogant.
It's very arrogant, but I'm a believer that history is far older than we think it is. And I think the more time goes on, the more that gets revealed. So when you're talking about something that's 4,000 or 5,000 years old, I think really you're talking about a retelling of a far older story. And I think it's very difficult when you're dealing with people that don't have an understanding of science. The written language is fairly new. It's an oral tradition for generations before it's ever written down. So my question with all of this is always like, what were they trying to talk about? What were they trying to say? What was the original experience that someone documented in story? And then that story was relayed over and over and over again, generation after generation, until it's eventually written down, and then they study it and take it literally. And then also translating it from Aramaic, which is the Dead Sea Scrolls, ancient Hebrew, all these different languages, to Latin and Greek and eventually English. But what's the original story? Like, what are they trying to document? What is this important knowledge that they want to share? And how screwed up would that get over the generations and generations of talking about it? But what ultimate truth is in there? Like, I'm absolutely fascinated by the story of Jesus Christ. Because if you wanted to come up with a way that people would live that would absolutely be far more beneficial than just going on natural instincts and tribal behavior, and you would follow Jesus' teachings. Like, I can't find a flaw in the way he tells you to live life. There's a lot of religions that involve, torturing non-believers and raping infidels and being able to do terrible things to the people that don't believe your religion. There's none of that in Christianity. It's all forgiveness. It's all treating your brother and your neighbor as if they're you. Like, it's a beautiful way to live life.
Are you Christian?
Well, I go to church, and I have been for quite a while.
Okay, so
I've been doing it for the last 3 or 4 years.
But that's not really an answer to the question.
Well, because I don't know. I think it's very interesting, and I do believe that if you follow the teachings of Jesus Christ, you will live a better life. I really do believe that. And one of the things I talk about is like, the people that I go to church with are the most fucking polite people I've ever met in my life. They're so kind and so nice, and everybody lets you out of the parking lot. Everybody's like, you go, you go. It's like the one, like it works. You know what I'm saying? Like if people are trying to find an idea, does that mean I believe people came back from the dead? Does that mean I believe Moses parted the Red Sea? Not really. No, it seems like that's most likely a story where people are telling it generation after generation after generation, but there's probably something happening. There's probably some truth to it. Then when you take into account some of the stories from the Old Testament, like the Book of Ezekiel, which I'm absolutely fascinated by. The Book of Ezekiel and his account of the wheel within a wheel and the fire flashing forth continually, and in the midst of the fire, as it were, gleaming metal. Like, what the hell is that? Like, what is that? Like, what are these stories? And in the midst of this gleaming metal, there's the likeness of 4 living creatures. Like, okay, they darted to and fro like the appearance of a flash of lightning. Okay, what is that? Like, what were they trying to say? And what was the original experience that people documented that was so important?
And it might have been a lot more similar to these UFO experiences.
That's the
that we've been
point.
seeing. Yeah,
and I think this is one of the things that Tucker goes back to.
The Christian story is so beautiful and so important. You know, Rene Girard's view of Christianity as really stopping the cycle of scapegoating. You know, scapegoating where, and I'm seeing it right now as part of the reason we've been pushing back against the moral panic on Epstein, is that you scapegoat the thing. You know, traditionally it literally was a goat, but you scapegoat the person or whatever.
Wait a minute, originally it was a goat?
It really was a goat, yeah. It was a goat, yeah. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, it would carry the sins of the community.
Oh, you sacrifice
and
the goat?
I think you would
free?
send it away to die or something.
Oh.
But over time it became
that's what
people.
a scapegoat was?
Yeah, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then,
It's always a goat.
but generally
goats are the devil. Goats are everything.
Oh,
goats get a bad rap.
Goats are in your lobby, aren't they? Or those
What's
are
that?
elk. No, in your
those are
lobby.
elk.
Okay.
No, there's a big difference.
Yeah, but I mean, so Christianity puts an end to that. It says stop scapegoating. I mean, they scapegoated Jesus, really. I mean, you kind of go, you scapegoat the purpose of the scapegoating was for the community to unite the community and scapegoat to put all of its sins on one thing and then kill it or get rid of it, and that was the way the community would restore unity. Christianity said no, we're not going to do it that way. That's immoral, and so he without sin should be the first to cast a stone. Jesus wasn't saying that prostitution was good or anything. He was saying that we should not be scapegoating. You've got sins too, so don't scapegoat this person. That's a really radical moment in human history, and it really is what allowed humans to spread. It creates a universal. I mean, Christianity is the first universal. It's really a universal religion. Maybe it's not the only, but it's a universal religion. It says everybody, is a child of God, and it's evangelical, and it wants other people to become Christian. That's different from other religions where I'm like, this is my God, I've got my own God here, and we're the best, and you suck, and
they make it very difficult to join.
Yeah, and it's not to say that Christians, obviously there was, fighting the Muslims, and there's some interesting revisionism there, but it's a beautiful religion.
There's terrible things that have been
religion.
done under the guise of Christianity, but if you listen to the teachings of Jesus Christ, they're not following his teachings. So it's like, it's just human behavior that they have tagged on to Christianity. So when people say Christianity is responsible for horrible atrocities, I say no. I say humans are. Because if it was actually Christianity, you would be following the teachings of Christ, and there would be none of those things.
I mean, anti-Semitism is not Christian.
Right.
So
right.
True Christianity is not that. So I think it's lovely, and I hope there's a revival of some of it. I'm not sure there is.
I think there is more now than before. There's a lot of young people that are getting into Christianity.
I think it's good to. I think it's also. I mean, it's interesting with we were talking about the UFO thing. It's an awareness that there's a higher power. So one can sort of say, look, the UFO thing, it's not the same as Christianity or whatever. But this awareness that we're not. There's something else going on. There's something more. There's something higher than us, and that we should be humble in the face of this just gigantic mystery. I think that puts us in a better mentality.
It certainly does. And if anything, if he's not the Son of God, if this was an actual historical figure, what an insanely wise human being. who didn't have these thoughts that are inherent to all of us of vengeance and lust and greed. Has none of these.
So radical. Also, you've heard it said before that you should, love your friends and hate your enemies. I say to you, you should love your enemies. I mean, that's just, it's like the hardest. I'm not there. I think very few people are there, but it's certainly the right aspiration, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the right aspiration. And Tucker thinks that this whole UFO thing is somehow connected to the spiritual realm. I need to read it now. I had Rep Luna on the podcast.
Oh, yeah.
And she was the one who really got me to read the Book of Enoch.
Dude, she's digging in.
Oh, yeah.
She's digging in. Yeah.
She's all in on the UFOs.
I know she is.
I don't know what they tell her.
Yeah.
I mean, is she useful to them? The whole thing is weird.
Maybe.
Maybe.
It's hard to know.
But when I started reading it, now, if that was included in the Bible, if they had, because it really was rabbis that decided that it didn't jive with the Torah, right?
Right.
And so they said, no, this one's
Can't
too
have
crazy.
this, yeah.
If that was in the Bible, and that's what we were taught,
things would be different.
can you imagine like Sunday church, the Watchers came down and made it. But meanwhile, that is in the same area of Qumran, written down as the Book of Isaiah. So all these things that are included in the Bible, that's there. It's all in the same word. Why are we ignoring some of it? Like, that's really crazy. Why ignoring the stuff that seems the most kooky?
I think that there's probably maybe disagreements because, I mean, there's so much change for the biblical canon from all of these different, councils, like the Council of Nicaea, all these different censorings and changing of the Bible. It's probably personal issue. It could be something as simple as just someone who personally did not believe that. It's like, that's bullshit. Remove that. That's not real. There's no way there were giants. But I love how at the beginning of the Bible, it's like there were giants in those times and the times before.
Yeah.
Anyway.
All over
Moving
the
on,
Bible.
never mention it again, in any sort of real context other than David and Goliath in a few situations. But no, I really am starting to wonder if there was a giant race that was on this planet,
there was.
dude. I really do.
The Native American depictions alone.
Yeah.
There's too many stories of enormous men that they had to kill.
Yeah. And their history, their oral tradition goes so far back.
Yeah, I mean, imagine we're talking 10,000.
Yeah.
Now that we know that human beings lived in North America 22,000 plus years ago, right? So the fossilized footprints that they found in New Mexico, so that's 22,000 years. So imagine if 22,000 years ago these things were a real thing. How many of them have you found? You haven't found any bones of humans from 22,000 years ago in North America, have you? No, right? So why?
Exactly.
Does the Smithsonian have them, these motherfuckers? If they really do have a giant down there, can you imagine?
I think they probably do, Joe.
Can you imagine if there's there's a tomb that you have to go into? It's like a vault. The guy cranks open the vault.
It's like the history version of Area 51.
You see a fucking head the size of this table, and you're like, what?
That's what we're dealing with. Yeah.
Yeah, and we had to kill him off.
Maybe.
Which totally makes sense. Why would you let that motherfucker live?
Right.
You got a 10-foot tall, 12-foot tall.
That's a problem.
Yeah, 2,000-pound human that eats people.
That is a problem. I wonder, I always get this because, the Watchers themselves are never described as giant beings.
Right.
I wonder where the giant came into the equation.
Well, isn't it us compared to them?
Maybe, because maybe there were slight aliens, like alien greys or something, and,
Well, look at the description of the Nephilim, how they destroyed everything.
Yeah.
Like, they created this thing that consumed everything, destroyed everything, including mankind. Like, what does that sound like?
It sounds like us.
That sounds like us.
It sounds like us.
Right. And also, you're saying mankind. Like, mankind, what are you saying? Are you saying aliens? Are you saying, who wrote this?
Yeah.
What is mankind?
For sure.
What does that term mean? I bet you're not saying man. I bet you're probably using an ancient language to describe whatever the dominant force was at the time that's writing all this down. What are we talking about?
Yeah.
What is these Watchers? They mated with humans? So what are they? And they created something that destroyed everything? What? So, okay, what is that? What are you talking about? And doesn't that sound exactly like humans? Like, what do? We fucking destroy everything.
Yeah.
We destroy everything. We light things on fire. We suck all the fish out of the ocean. We throw our garbage in it. We are so destructive.
Yeah.
And we're so consuming. We consume. We're one of the only animals that dies because we eat too much.
Yeah. Right.
Right? We're one of the only animals.
Yeah. Well, we are the only example on this planet of the level of intelligence that we have. I mean, it's just phenomenal. I mean, really quite phenomenal when you consider all of the various avenues of evolution that have been given the opportunity.
We have a massive leap.
Phenomenal leap, but a leap that has to in some way have been intervened with, in my opinion. I mean, it's such a quantum leap in our ability of cognition and the brain size. I mean, I do find the stoned ape theory very interesting, and you know, the concept of using psychedelics, and I think there's a role to play in that for sure. But I just think that when you have such a novel trajectory change from every other creature, every other animal on this planet, that tells me that there is something fundamentally accelerated in humans. And whether that can just be put down to shamanic use of psychedelics, I don't know. I think that when you invoke, again, all of these various theologic stories, it becomes clear that something was interfacing with us. And perhaps at one point, we were interfacing with them. And there was a communication and a relation that has since long degraded after, you know, cataclysmic outreaches and, you know.
I think the evolution that came out of psychedelics and primitive man was the escape from the barbaric nature of our roots.
Right.
I don't think it's necessarily the development of the human brain.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's probably
Communal
a way to
societal.
Use the human brain with its primate background, but soften the ego.
Right. Yeah.
And endorse a feeling of community. And promote a feeling of community and love and the connectiveness that you get from psychedelics. It will allow you to traverse the timelines between incredibly barbaric hunter-gatherers with stone-tipped tools to agrarian societies where people are all living together and cooperating, and it makes sense. But what doesn't make sense is the giant leap to being a human in the first place.
No.
It's kooky.
It is,
and
kooky.
It's in the Bible. At least it's in the Book of Enoch.
It's
that's
there.
The crazy part about it is that they literally describe what we're, and not just us. Like many people have theorized. Like, have we been a product? Are we a product of genetic manipulation? Are we a product of accelerated evolution?
Well, again, my own experiences, I just feel like there is quite obviously a vast intelligence spectrum out there, in my opinion, and I think it goes beyond our own perception of space and time, and I think that there are likely things that can come in from, you know, realms that we just don't really believe are real, like the astral, and you know, even the realm of the imagination is an interesting thing. What is this place inside of our heads that we can instantaneously create anything we want, and all things, including everything on this table, once came from inside someone's mind? Like, we are excretors of ideas into reality. We kind of render reality into something that nothing.
How do you perceive that force? Is it just energy, or do you anthropomorphize it into like a being that you can, you know, recognize and think about?
Right. But there's kind of no denying, at least from a recognizable, if you had to look, how do you quantify it? How do you measure it? There's no denying that evil takes place. You know, like you could come up with any number of massacres throughout history, and you say that's an evil act.
There's no question.
Right. So evil is a thing that's real.
If there's good, there's evil.
Right.
Yeah.
And then there have been many, many things that people have done. You're like, wow, good exists in the world. There is still good. So we know both those things are real things. We just don't know what's the root of them all. And are there really angels and demons, or are those the scapegoats for this bizarre dance of good and evil that just exists in the world?
Mm-hmm. Well, if it weren't, for Adam and Eve eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, there wouldn't be any perception of good and evil. It'd just be true or false. Which is, the reason that Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden, because in the beginning, it was, they were living in a world of either, truth or falsehood.
You're right.
And after eating the fruit of the difference between good and evil, they became opinionated. Oh, that's good, I like it. That's bad, I don't like it. But the issue of true or false got became muddled.
Yeah.
And they no longer were fit inhabitants of the Garden of Eden, of paradise.
What's your take on Lilith?
Yeah, Lilith. Well, there's no mention of her in the Bible per se, but there's a lot of mention of her in the rabbinic literature that sprung up after the Bible. Yeah. The story is that I think after Cain killed Abel, the Adam. No, was it that after that? I think it was after Adam and Eve were expelled from the garden. That they stopped having sex. So Adam, then was just sleeping, with Lilith, and they spawned innumerable demons as a result of their relationship. Yeah, and after a while, Adam and Eve, reconciled, and they got the things together again. Yeah. But Lilith, plays a role in the understanding of evil in the world. Like it's the result of the spawn of Lilith.
What do you think Lilith was originally?
Who was
if it was a thing?
Yeah, I don't know. Well, that's called midrash. It's the explication of the Bible, by the rabbis. So it's what's called extra biblical.
Ah.
Yeah, and I've only looked into extra biblical stuff to a certain extent.
What's the source of that stuff?
The imagination, and I think the surrounding environment, societies, culture, influenced by the Greeks, the Sumerians, the Akkadians, the Hittites. There's a lot of accumulation of other cultures onto interpreting the stories that occur in the text. A lot of fanciful things, and entertaining things. Like, for example, Lilith is the source of the demonic entities out there.
Yeah, I found out about Lilith like 6 months ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I'd never even heard about it. Do you remember when we found out about Lilith? Somebody brought it up on a show, right?
Yeah, who brought it up, I'm wondering.
I don't remember, but I was like, what? Who's Lilith?
Yeah, was it Jordan Peterson?
It could have been.
Yeah, but
very
because
possibly.
He's a keen student of the Bible.
Very possibly. It was him. I do not remember, though. But I remember thinking, like, wow. Like, and then the original story. Like, so when you're talking about the biblical translations of the Adam and Eve story that we're all accustomed to, it's all a watered down sort of, or a strange translated version of the ancient Hebrew. But you've read the actual ancient Hebrew version of it. Like, what did you get out of it? Like, what did you...
Well, most of the translations of the Hebrew Bible are quite good. Like, the King James Version, it's, very accurate. Yeah, it's a bit, stilted.
Is anything missing in the translation from when you read it in ancient Hebrew, or do you think it's pretty clear?
It's, fairly one-to-one correspondence between the Hebrew words and the English translation. Certain things are interpreted through a Christian lens because the Christians wrote the King James Bible translation.
Right.
Yeah. But the words and the grammar and the narratives, they're pretty much accurate. Yeah. They spent a lot of time working on painstaking, translations. So, there was a responsibility, to do it accurately.
Imagine that story, like trying to pass that one down for 1,000 years.
Yeah.
So there was only two people, and then there was an apple.
Right.
And a snake talked Eve into eating that apple, and everything got fucked.
Yeah. It's a very strange story, isn't it?
Very strange story. What do you think it really was all about?
I think there were two people named Adam and Eve.
For real?
As if they were real.
What do you mean by that?
Well, if you imagine that there was an Adam and Eve and you visualize the garden they were in and the snake and their interactions, there you have it.
So you think the biblical interpretation is a literal recalling of actual events that took place?
No. I don't think that. Well, it's like if you smoke DMT and you enter into this world, it's true, it's overwhelmingly convincing, it's got its own, laws, its own system, things are... things are regular, like certain things happen, certain interactions take place. Yeah, and you're there. You're convinced it's real, and you interact with it to the best of your ability. So I think that's the case with the narratives in the text. It's not. It isn't a matter of interpreting what they mean, as much as understanding what happened.
Boy, that's obscure. So. It's not interpreting what they mean, but understanding what happened.
Yeah, what did the snake say to Eve?
So a snake really talked to Eve, though.
It was as if a snake talked to Eve.
As if.
Yeah.
So perhaps a psychedelic experience, perhaps an altered state of consciousness?
No, I think it was a case of a woman standing near a tree and a snake coming up to her and saying certain things, and they have a conversation.
For real, for real.
As if it were real. Well, the stories have been told so many times.
Right, that's the problem.
And, they seem... Well, if you...
Seems like they're blaming everything on Eve, too, which is like a little suspect. I like to hear her side of it.
Well, the one who got punished without even having a chance to explain himself was the snake. So God asks Adam what happened, and he asks Eve what happened, and he just lays it on the snake.
Right.
Yeah.
And the snake's like, I didn't tell her anything. I can't even talk.
Well,
this lady wanted to eat that apple, and she blamed me.
Well, back then, snakes could talk. Or in that world, snakes talk.
How so?
Well, they were the wisest of all the animals in the garden. So, they could speak.
Right, but you speak of these things as if, like we're talking about when you go to the zoo, the monkeys swing from the vines, it's normal. Snakes talk.
Well, it's a bit of a paradox. Like if you...
Let me ask you this.
So if you treat those stories as if they were real, you're opening yourself up to this universe of Adam and Eve were in the garden. Then they had Cain and Abel. Cain killed Abel. Then Cain had children, and his children begot the 70 nations. And then there was a flood because mankind was bad. Mm-hmm. Noah and his family survived. They all spoke one language afterwards. There was on a tower. There was Nimrod, there was Abraham, there was Isaac and Jacob. So it's this world which seems to be quite coherent, quite consistent. It all ties together. It's quite consistent from book to book, from narrative to narrative. It is a different way of looking at the Bible. It isn't dogma like you have to do this or you have to do that. Or it isn't like a Jungian archetype or a psychodynamic, wish fulfillment. It's this world that that is articulated, spelled out in a very ancient, very influential text.
So, is it also possible that something completely different took place, but that over time and over a oral tradition of who knows how many hundreds of years before they actually wrote it down? And then writing it down, that you're getting a version of the actual event that's very different than what really took place. But you think about it like the version in the scripture. And if you think about it in the version of the scripture, are you thinking about it like as if this was an event as recorded, or are you thinking this is a representation of an archetype or some sort of moment in human history that they're trying to recollect and pass down?
Well, if you
that makes
consider,
any
yeah, kind of, yeah. Well, if you consider the text to be prophetically received, prophecy is communication between the divine and man, and the text was prophetically received. In fact, Philo of Alexandria, one of Terence McKenna's heroes, used to say, the most accurate historians were the prophets, because they heard it, directly, from the initiator of the event, the witness of the event, the one who could understand the event in the huge context. So it's a prophetically received text, which means it contains information received from a spiritual sort of level, which you would think is a universal field of sorts.
How much have you ever paid attention, if at all, to any of that ancient Sumerian stuff, like the Anunnaki and...
Some. Yeah, I watched this really great documentary a few years back. Yeah, but I wouldn't consider myself as knowing much about it.
Right. That to me is one of the weirder origin stories.
Yeah. So what is that origin story? On my recall, it quite fascinating, but not the details.
Well, there's multiple versions of it. First of all, the story of this, the fantastic story is told by Zecharia Sitchin. So Zecharia Sitchin, who wrote The 12th Planet, and he wrote several other books. He was a biblical scholar and a linguist, and he spent a lot of time studying the ancient Sumerian text, the cuneiform. And what he believes is that it tells a story of an ancient relationship between a race of beings on a far distant planet that's in an elliptical orbit, and it comes near Earth every 3,600 years, and that they had engineered human beings out of lower primates. They had accelerated our evolution, and that all of what we know about the cosmos, all of what we know about, they have these detailed, I don't see the ancient tablets that have a detailed map of the solar system from 6,000 years ago.
Right, okay.
They have the sun in the center and all the moon, and they have these really enormous beings. And these enormous beings were supposed to be these things called the Anunnaki.
Okay.
And the literal translation is those from heaven to earth came.
Uh-huh.
It's one of the weirder, if you love a great science fiction version of the origin story of humans, it's the most fun one.
Yeah, it brings to mind, the sons of God, the B'nai Elohim, which occur in the story of the flood and Noah.
The Nephilim, too.
Yeah, the Nephilim, the Rephaim, they were huge. They were giants.
Yes, yeah.
Men of renown.
Yeah.
And they intermarried, or they had sex with the daughters of man, and from them came a race.
Yeah.
So that story is interpreted or perceived through the lens of the Hebrew Bible too.
Really?
Yeah. Well, that is a story in the text. Before the flood, is the B'nai Elohim. Come down to earth. They have intercourse with, the daughters of man, and out of those relationships, comes this, race of giants.
That's the most fun one.
Yeah,
isn't it?
Well, they all got swept away in the flood. So that's an interesting, turn of events.
Well, if you interpret the flood as the Younger Dryas impact theory, which created the flood, which lines up.
Right, that does line up.
Yeah, it lines up time-wise, lines up with how it would go down. Yeah, just no evidence of giants. That's the only thing we're missing. If they found some giants.
Well, in the meantime, you can assume that the giants were real, and understand their origin, what they were like, what they did, why they did it, what the results were.
Yes, it also goes back to the Enlightenment, to the idea that God doesn't exist, and the idea that the human being is the measure of all things. Well, if the human being is the measure of all things, what does that mean? Our reason. And our reason is completely flawed. All of us do things every day which are unreasonable, sinful, wrong, and absurd. Right? And the reasonable person says, wait a second, why did I do that? What do I have to refer to in my confusion and my self-loathing? Well, the Bible was a pretty good bet, for the Hebrew Bible for 6,000 years, right? The Christian Bible for 2,000 is a pretty good bet. Say, wait a second, let's talk about human nature. You really aren't that smart. You really aren't in charge of the world. You really aren't. Although you think you are, you think that because you're human. But God's in charge of the world, and there's a certain way things are. And if you'd like to get out of your wretched self-consciousness and self-delusion, you better get your ass into church.
But don't you think that, when atheists talk about religion and they criticize organized religion and criticize the Bible, they talk about things that are in the Bible that seem preposterous, right? They talk about people rising from the dead and walking on water, particularly the Old Testament, right? To use that as a guidebook for life, you have to kind of ignore some of the stuff that doesn't make sense.
Well,
don't you think?
The Bible's a myth. Okay, the Bible, right, especially the Christian Bible comes out of the Jewish Bible. It's a retelling of the story in a different way. But the Jewish Bible is a myth, and the myth is the myth of creation and the myth of human experience. So what it does is, chapter by chapter, story by story, it challenges us with disturbing and bizarre images. And it says, why don't you try to understand this? See if you can understand this. What does it really mean to escape from Egypt? Does it mean escaping from your inner Pharaoh? What does it really mean to part the Red Sea? So these stories are told, any myth is a dramatic retelling of an underlying reality that can't be expressed rationally. Right? So the atheists say everything can be expressed rationally. For example, you know that the earth is burning up. You can tell that because sometimes things get warmer and sometimes things get colder. You can also tell that when things get colder, that's obviously because the earth is burning up, because the sun is melting the glaciers and the glaciers are raising the temperature. You can also tell, of course, that to be fair to everyone, children change sex. You know that, don't you? And you can tell that men can compete as women and women compete as men. This is all human confusion because we trust our senses and we trust our mind, and the mind just, it doesn't work real good. We're very cunning, but we aren't very smart, human beings. And that's the message of the Bible. And so if you look at Moses was, the Egyptians tried to kill him all of his life. The Egyptians tried to kill him. He didn't have any trouble with the Egyptians because God was on his side. He had trouble with the Jews because the Jews were always saying, who the hell do you think you are? So all the Old Testament is the story of atheists, really, saying, who the hell do you think you are?
So when you're talking about the Bible, right? And the lessons in the Bible, isn't part of the problem is that people translated it from ancient Hebrew to Latin to Greek and all these other languages, and then eventually to English. Like, a lot's lost along the way, right? And a lot is open to interpretation. Like, a lot of what we're talking about in these myths and stories that people take as factual occurrences, they probably were some sort of there's some sort of a lesson in the myth, some sort of allegory. There's things about these stories that probably have hints of truth. But isn't it hard to kind of decipher it all if you can't speak the mother language?
That's a very good question. So I want to first let me ask you. Okay, I'm going to tell you a story. Okay.
Okay.
These two octopuses walk into a laundromat.
Okay.
See, that's what a myth is. I said two octopuses walk into a laundromat, and you didn't say, wait a second, octopuses can't walk and they wouldn't be in a laundromat.
Well, I thought about it, but I'm being polite.
So what you said is, yeah, tell me more. Okay.
I'm hoping there's a good joke.
Okay, well, I'll get to that. But it's the same thing with the Bible is really two octopuses walk into a laundromat. So I'm going to tell you a story. I want you to suspend your disbelief because there's something in the story you might get a kick out of. Mm-hmm. There might be some wisdom in it. There might, yes and might no. But if you listen as you would to a story, which the Bible is, it's a myth, rather than to a factual retelling, you might get a kick out of it. Now, as far as a translation goes, I can read the Bible in Hebrew. I started learning when I was 40. It's easy language. And there are a lot of mistranslations. But the main point is not the mistranslations, because there are some pretty good English translations too. But the main point is saying that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense.
So what do you think the Bible is? Do you think the Bible is a bunch of very wise people got together and they formed these stories to sort of illustrate the folly of mankind and how one needs to have like a moral compass and guiding principles that are set in stone, and that you have these rules to live your life in a moral and just way, and that'll make for a better society? Like, what do you think the Bible actually is?
Well, a friend of mine, a rabbi, was a Reform rabbi, was applying to get into an Orthodox yeshiva, an Orthodox college, and he's a Reform rabbi. So the guy says, you have very good credentials and you're very well learned. Do you think the Bible is literally the work of God? The rabbi says, no. So the guy says, well, is it possible? Rabbi says, yes. Guy says, okay, you're in. Right? So there's Dennis Prager, who I'm crazy about, said the other day, he said, I don't believe in the Torah, the Jewish Bible, because of God. He said, I believe in God because of the Torah. So if you read the Torah, the Jewish Bible, and the Christian Bible is just an extension of that, you say, my God, this is incredible wisdom. This goes back to the beginning of time. People who've tried to figure out everything. And they didn't have the language that we have, but they had the language that they had. And this was thousands of years of experience progressed and compressed into a myth. So we know that this is true because liberals have always been in love with the myths, especially Jews, with the myths of other cultures, right? We say how beautiful it is that this culture has that myth, that the Haida Indians say the world was formed by a large beaver, and when the beaver slapped his tail like that, it made the oceans, and when the blah, blah, blah. It's a gorgeous myth. Mm-hmm. Nobody says of that myth, wait a second, you can't have a beaver that big. Right?
That's what I would say.
Yeah, okay.
I would step in and go, hey, man.
If categories dissolve, especially fundamental ones, the culture is dissolving because the culture is a structure of category. Mm-hmm. That's what it is.
Right.
So, and in fact, culture is a structure of category that we all share. So we see things the same way. Well, that's why we can talk. I mean, not exactly the same way, because then we'd have nothing to talk about. But roughly speaking, we have a bedrock of agreement. That's the Bible, by the way. So I just walked through the Museum of the Bible in Washington. That was very cool. It's a very cool museum.
So the structure, that's what the Bible
Yeah, it's what
provides.
I figured out. I just figured this out this week. So it was a cool thing to walk through because it's chronological. They have one floor, which is the history of the Bible. Mm. But it's not exactly that. It's really what it is the history of the book. Now, in many ways, the first book was the Bible. I mean, literally, because at one point there was only one book. Like, as far as our Western culture is concerned, there was one book. And for a while, literally, there was only one book. And that book was the Bible. And then before it was the Bible, it was it was scrolls and it was writings on papyrus, but we were starting to aggregate written text together, and it went through all sorts of technological transformations, and then it became books that everybody could buy, the book everybody could buy, and the first one of those was the Bible, and then it became all sorts of books that everybody could buy. But all those books, in some sense, emerged out of that underlying book, and that book itself, the Bible isn't a book, it's a library. It's a collection of books. And so what I figured out was, partly because I was talking to my brother-in-law, Jim Keller, who's the world's greatest chip designer and has now designed a chip that's as powerful as the human brain, which is optimized for artificial intelligence learning, by the way. And so I talked to him about that. He said, you heard of the internet? I said, yeah, Jim, I've heard of the internet. He said, this is way more revolutionary than that. So in any case, we were talking about meaning in text because we were talking about translation and the problem of understanding text. And Jim said, the meaning of words is coded in the relationship of the words to one another. And the postmodernists make that case, that all meaning is derived from the relationship between words. That's wrong because, well, what about rage? That's not words. And what about moving your hand? That's not words. So it's wrong, but part of it's right because the meaning we derive from the verbal domain is encoded in the relationship between words. So now then you think, well, let's think about the relationship between words. Well, some words are dependent on other words. Some ideas are dependent on other ideas. The more ideas are dependent on a given idea, the more fundamental that idea is. That's a definition of fundamental. So now imagine you have an aggregation of texts in a civilization. You say, which are the fundamental texts? And the answer is, the texts upon which most other texts depend. And so you'd put Shakespeare way in there in English because so many texts are dependent on Shakespeare's literary revelations. And Milton would be in that category, and Dante would be in that category, at least in translation. Fundamental authors, part of the Western canon, not because of the arbitrary dictates of power, but because those texts influenced more other texts. And then you think about that as a hierarchy, okay, with the Bible at its base, which is certainly the case. Now imagine that's the entire corpus of linguistic production, all things considered. Now, how do you understand that? Like, literally, how do you understand that? The answer is you sample it by reading and listening to stories and listening to people talk. You sample that whole domain. You build a low-resolution representation of that inside you, and then you listen and see through that. And so it isn't that the Bible is true. It's that the Bible is the precondition for the manifestation of truth, which makes it way more true than just true. It's a whole different kind of true. And I think this is not only literally the case, factually, I think it can't be any other way. It's the only way we can solve the problem of perception.